Hey, what's up guys? In this Blender tutorial, we're going to be making a double-sided paper shader with translucency and semi-realistic ink. So we're going to start by adding a plane using the shortcut Shift-A. And all I'm doing now is scaling it down so that the square is 1 Blender unit in size. For the purposes of this tutorial, 1 Blender unit represents 10 centimeters in real life. And I'm making this an A4 sized page, which is 210 millimeters wide and 297 millimeters tall. So I scaled this plane by 2.1 along the x-axis and 2.97 along the y-axis to make it have the proportions of an A4 sheet of paper. So let's go into the material, and as you can see, I've already made an empty material. I named it double-sided page. Before we get into the material, I'm just going to add these point lights so that we can see the translucency better as we're editing the material. I'm also going to rotate this page by 90 degrees so that it's vertical, so that it's easier for us to flip back and forth between the front side and the back side. So let's start by adding an image texture. And we will need 4 image textures. This texture is the front side of the page. So this is like a template that I just got from Google Docs. And here's what we're going to put on the back side of this page. So far we have our front side image texture and our back side image texture. And the 2 other images we need are blurry versions of the front and the back. This one, asideblur.png, is just aside.png with a very subtle amount of Gaussian blur. And this is just to make the translucency effect look more realistic. And we're going to load in the blurred version of the B-side texture too. So let's make the paper material now, and let's start by adding a principled BSDF. This is pretty much just going to be the blank page. And let's just set that color of the page to white because we're making a white page. But we're going to add a control for the user to adjust the page color later on when we make the node group. So right now let's set the page color to white. The principled BSDF on the top is our ink material. Maybe you've noticed that the ink on printed pages tends to be shinier than the paper that it's on. And the degree to which this effect occurs, of course, depends on the type of paper used, as well as the ink. To replicate this phenomenon in our material, we set the roughness of the ink principled node to a low number, and we set the roughness of the page principled node to a high number. To mix these together, we put the ink principled on the top and the paper principled on the bottom, and we set the color of the page's content as the mix factor. This makes it so that the darker the color of the texture, the more ink there is and the more shiny it is. Now what we need to do is add the translucency. So we add a mix shader and a translucent BSDF. And we will plug it into the mix shader. And we're going to connect the blurry image texture of the opposite side. Oops, it just lagged a bit there. So I'll just move this light so you can see it better. You can barely see the other side of the page when the light is in front of the page. But when I move the light to be behind the page, now you can clearly see the backside image shining through, and I'll just turn up the sample count so it looks clearer. It is lagging quite a bit because I don't have the highest end hardware for Blender. So turn the sample count back down for performance. And so if you've probably noticed that the backside translucency is facing the wrong way. And to fix this, you connect a EEVEE node into the vector input of all 4 image textures, and then we will use a mapping node to mirror the image texture along the x-axis. And we'll use this for the B-side textures, both the sharp sharp texture and the blurry texture. Now the backside translucency appears correctly. So here's how the shader looks so far. We are now ready to do the same thing for the other side of the page. Let's insert a mix shader node as the last node in our setup. And we'll pretty much duplicate everything that is between the image textures and the final mix shader to make the backside of the page look as desired. So let's just connect that up there. Connect the blurry front side image texture into the translucent color, and connect the sharp backside image texture into the ink color. I mean the principled BSDF node for the ink. What we have to do is make the top part of our node setup show when the plane is viewed from the front, and the bottom half of our shader node setup be displayed when the backside of the plane is viewed. And we'll plug the back-facing output of the geometry node into the factor of the final mix shader. Doing that, and as you can see here, this is what the front of the front side of the page looks like. It's got that shiny ink effect. This is what the back side of the page looks like. If I move the light to be behind the page, then we can see the front side of the page shining through to the back side. Just up the sample count here so it looks clearer. Okay, so we're back in the shader, and there are a couple more things we need to do. Well, I want to make this a node group that is easy to use, and I would like it if I could put the mapping and for the mirroring of the UVs inside of the node, which would make the node group easier to use. But if I do this, then there's no way for the user to select the texture input images. If you know of a way to put the mapping inside of the node, then please leave a comment down below and let me know how to do that. I don't know of any way to do that, so I'm putting the image textures as well as the mapping node outside of the node group. So I'm just labeling the inputs to this node group. This one is this one's the backside blurry. This one is the sharp backside, and this one is the blurry front side. Just checking to make sure that I labeled the inputs correctly. I'm going to call this node group double-sided page. Here I'm just reordering it so it's more organized. Now we add an ink roughness input, which will be a factor with a minimum value of 0 and a maximum value of 1, as well as a paper roughness input, also a factor with a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 1. We also need another color input, and this will be the color of our paper. And let's plug that in to the base color of the principled. And we need to connect the ink roughness to the top principled, because that's our ink principled node, and we will plug the paper roughness into the ones on the bottom. So that's our paper principled node. Here I'm just setting some default values, and we're going to tab out and set these values to what they were before. And we want the paper to be white, not like completely white, but almost white, because in real life, no material is absolutely 100% white. So here's what that looks like, and it looks the same as it did before. We didn't make any modifications to how the material should look. Now what I'm doing here is adding a clear coat to make a laminated, like glossy laminated effect, a gloss coat that goes over the ink after it has been printed. So we're using a glossy BSDF and mixing it in with a Fresnel node as the factor. Waiting for the shader to compile. It may be hard to see the glossiness because the point lights are so small and I don't have an HDRI background texture, so I'm increasing the radius of these point lights so you can see the gloss better. So here's the that glossy coat, the laminated paper look. And of course, you don't want literally every paper to be laminated, so let's add an option for the user to adjust how much of a clear coat they want. So we do this with a math node, set it to multiply, and we'll add another float input, and it will be a factor with a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 1. And we just multiply this input with the Fresnel factor, so the user can then adjust how much of a clear coat they would like on their page. Let's open up the 3D view here. Okay, just for organization, I should have done this earlier, but you don't actually need 2 mapping nodes, you only need 1. So that just makes the setup cleaner. But now we have this problem with the clear coat. The backside of the page isn't rendering properly, but if you change the index of refraction input of the Fresnel node to a number that is below 1, the issue disappears on the backside, but appears on the front side instead. So what we need to do, and this is a trick that I learned from the Blender Artists Forum, I'm using a mix node with the back facing as the factor, to use an IOR greater than 1 on the front side, and an IOR that is the reciprocal of that IOR on the back side. And that fixes the Fresnel issue. Here's what our node group looks like so far. So you can change the color of the paper. Here are the options. I did forget to add this earlier. This is an option for the user to control how translucent the paper is. And we'll simply plug that input into the NIX effector. And the default value will be 0.1, as we have said earlier. So here is our shader, but there is one last thing that we need to do with the translucency. The problem is that the paper has the same translucency everywhere on the page. And we want to make it so that the places that have more ink are less translucent or more opaque. We will do this by multiplying the translucency with the color of the ink. And this makes the parts of the page that have more ink less translucent, which makes the paper shader look more realistic. So that's the finished shader. This is what the finished shader looks like. And you can download the blend file from my Gumroad page for free. The link is in the description down below. That wraps up this Blender tutorial, and thanks for watching.